Hello, good afternoon. Well, thank you for inviting me to a sunny-ish Lisbon. I understand I'm the very last speaker of today, so I can feel the energy levels in the room ebbing away as I speak. But I've been given the pleasure to talk to you about 4G and the journey towards 5G. So I'm a networks guy. I'm going to try and keep it less techie. Because I understand there's a very diverse audience here today from all parts of industry. So I represent O2 in the UK. We're owned by Telefonica currently, and I look after network strategy. I've been with O2 8.5 years. Before that, I actually looked after the radio network. So I get very excited about antennas, cell sites, and that kind of thing. It's a kind of peculiar hobby of mine. But yeah, I look after network strategy. O2, for those of you that don't know, we're the second largest operator in the UK. We have 25 million consumers, 14 million non-O2 customers on our national Wi-Fi network, and then 8 million on top with our MVNO customers. So we serve 47 million customers in the UK. So the agenda, and I hope to cover this in about 20 minutes. You'll be pleased to hear. So first of all, I just want to touch on a bit of context around mobile, the rise of mobile in a connected society. It's something that we take for granted, and I'll use the term quite regularly, invisible infrastructure. It's all around you. You can't see it or touch it, but you really need it, and you miss it when it's not there. Let's put it that way. And I just want to then talk about the hype curve. You've probably seen a couple of hype curves over this past few days, just to plot out some of the key technologies and where we see them on the hype curve in the industry. And then I'll briefly touch upon 5G and build upon the previous speaker in terms of our vision as to what 5G is, before some closing remarks. But before I begin, this is a stat from Ofcom, the UK national regulator. It's 2 years old now. It's really quite depressing, actually. It says that we're communicating now on smartphones more than we are sleeping, which is a depressing thought. 8 hours, 41 minutes. I'm sure it's even higher now, 2 years on, compared to sleeping. Well, what does that mean? Well, I guess what we're trying to say is that mobile, the device that you've got in your hand, is absolutely essential to modern living. In the UK, 80%, 8 out of 10 of us have a smartphone, and 3/4 of those people connect to the mobile internet to get internet on the go. So it's really, really crucial. Some recent reports stated, I think it was Boston Consulting, that mobile contributes 11% of South Korea's GDP. Okay, so we're talking big numbers here in terms of dollars, because it facilitates value to the economy. It helps businesses trade. And there's been a recent report in the UK that 5G, when it comes along, and you'll be pleased to hear we're aligned, it's on or around 2020. There are some aspects that might come earlier, will contribute an additional £7 billion to the UK economy, supporting businesses connect digitally. So, you know, big numbers. It's very important. This is just looking back on the digital revolution. Of course, we've had the agricultural revolution, the industrial revolution, all a bit before my time. But the digital revolution, if we just look back recent years, 2009, that's when I joined O2. And I got my very first smartphone at that time. But I'm looking at this really, if we look at the technology area up there, for example, we've seen 3 or 4 really big forces come together over the past 6 or 7 years. Cloud computing. It's amazing now how much data, our own data is somewhere in the cloud. Social media, social networking, which didn't really exist 7 or 8 years ago, and mobile, all underpinned by this 4G network. Certainly in the UK, 4G was launched, well, EE came first, but the other operators launched 4G 3.5 years ago. It's only been around a very short time, and yet already we're over 90% outdoor population coverage in the UK and in many countries in Europe, and that's in the space of 3.5 years. Okay, it's cost us £3 billion to deploy it, but it's there and it's underpinning the connectivity. And what that means is that if we look, for example, on the consumer behaviour side, people now expect immediacy. You get very frustrated when you can't kind of look at your Facebook or your email instantaneously, particularly if you're on a train or in the car, in particular, moving from where you live to where you work. And then in the business and public sector, and I understand these past couple of days we've been exploring smart cities and government applications and so on. There's a lot there going on that's connected really by this invisible asset, this invisible infrastructure, which we call a mobile network. For example, a municipal app, I'm a great fan of Citymapper. We use it in London. I get everywhere with it. It tells me where I need to go, get off the bus, get on this train, this is how much it's going to cost you. I even used it today in Lisbon, which was interesting. So, here's the hype curve. Okay, it's the famous Gartner hype curve. And a couple of things to call out. Some of the light blue dots. So I've said big data, the cloud, social and mobile, they're all well embedded, well established. What's coming down the track now are things like machine learning, Internet of Things that Alan talked about, autonomous vehicles. Would you trust to get into an autonomous vehicle and let it drive? Well, there are some big scale pilots ongoing now and a lot of money around the world really trying to push the boundaries there. And I've actually put down here a point of debate in my presentation in terms of the hype curve, 5G use cases. So there's a lot of talk from the industry about 5G. A lot of it is supply-led. So you'll go to my trade conference, Mobile World Congress, it's all 5G, 5G, 5G. But the use cases, I think, at the moment are emerging. And certainly some of the business case behind it is fragile. And I'll touch upon that. But if we look at these couple of issues here, machine learning, IoT, and autonomous vehicles and connection, the first one, of course, is that, my boss is an algorithm. I don't know if any of you work for an algorithm. It's not very nice. 250,000 Uber drivers do. They rely on it every day to get their trade. And of course, we're starting to act and interact more with our smartphones and technology in the home with voice recognition. Today, it feels a little bit of a gimmick, but you can see really a couple of years down the road, voice is actually going to be one of the key ways that you interact with some of the platforms. No presentation will be complete without the Internet of Things. It's not the Internet of Dangerous Things, although I did like that label. A couple of people now have got this technology in their home where they can see how warm or cold their house is and turn on the heating whilst they're away. So we've taken some baby steps there. O2 last year launched Smart Home, which is a kind of integrated package where we will come and professionally install the smart sensors and then teach you how to use them and then provide you with an app to make it simple for the general public to use. The more interesting thing is the Internet of X, the Internet of Things for industry. So an oil rig has 30,000 sensors, all which can be connected back to the internet, back to the cloud. And this is where we actually see there's going to be some massive opportunity in terms of connecting that back via a mobile network. And really, I think we've touched upon driverless cars already. Drones, we're going to talk a little bit about drones later on, but they're coming. Amazon in particular are kind of trialing that now with their Amazon Prime service. But again, I think some of the big implications are more in industry and agriculture on a vast scale. How we connect those systems, those sensors back to servers. So all of this is coming together. Transport, finance, manufacturing, health, government, all of these new use cases are starting to bubble away. And you're there in a company, whether that's a municipality or an enterprise, And you're going, well, how do I manage all of this? You've got a fixed budget. Actually, about 27% of your budget is for growth. The rest then is on keeping the lights on. And an interesting thing is that Gartner have predicted that next year, over 50% of IT spend is actually going to be outside the IT department as people use Dropbox, Google Drive, various clouds. So actually a lot of the control and the spend as well is actually moving outside company IT departments. And of course 5G, the 5G fabric is on the horizon. So this is our kind of infographic on the journey to 5G. The mobile industry has been categorized by a number of Gs: analog, first generation, second generation GSM. That's when I joined the industry. 3G, which came along and was empty by and large for a couple of years until some bright folks in California invented the iPhone. And at that point, we really saw the uptake then in terms of mobile data. And then 4G, which I say has been around 3 or 4 years only right now, pioneered and rolled out, of course, in places like South Korea. So 5G is coming along on or around 2020, with some people already making moves and press releases to say it will be a bit earlier, certainly in Korea and Japan, where they have obviously some very strong agendas around the Olympics and so on. The systems tend to coexist, which is rather annoying for a mobile operator. So we've got 2G out there today, 3G and 4G. I think there'll be no exception when 5G comes along. And I'd like to set some expectations really in terms of, we think that 4G will be able to do a lot of the heavy lifting for the next decade and a half once it's rolled out. So we have a phrase of islands of 5G in a sea of 4G. So we don't believe that you'll see ubiquitous 5G on a nationwide basis without some compelling use cases, I think, from industry partners. And this is the kind of 5G ecosystem that we're trying to develop in order to expose it and support things either in the transport business, the healthcare business, and actually one case, of course, smart cities. And I know that a lot of talk has been done over the past day and a half in terms of smart city experience, and we see a lot of opportunity in that within O2. The future is absolutely urban. You can see from the infographic at the bottom there that today 50% of people, global population, live in cities, and that will be 80% by 2050. So there's an urban challenge. That's where everyone's living, and it's going to get worse. So how do we use these systems? How do we use mobile technology? And the two approaches that we've seen in O2, we're standing back a little bit from it. We've seen obviously the good work that's been done in London and in Bristol. That was on the agenda the other day. There's a top-down approach set by government, which it tends to be proprietary, using a single vendor. It's very good for some critical applications, for emergency services, for traffic management. And then there's a bottom-up approach, which the UK government seems to be favouring at the moment, which is working with a variety of tech partners using open interfaces and open APIs. But ultimately, it's to achieve the same goals, really, which is built around citizens and business needs. It's fair to say it's all been pilots, really, so far. We're seeing limited production environments. We know that will come. But it's very, very early days. Machine-to-machine opportunities. Sorry about the busyness of this slide. Actually, this was done by an engineer, you can probably tell. But at one side, you've got latency, so that's the delay, what we call the click to bang, how long it takes you from clicking to actually getting a response from a server, getting a web page on your phone. We call it latency. It can be really quite long, like a second, or it can be really quite short, like a millisecond, a thousandth of a second. And then on the x-axis, you've got the data bandwidth that you would need from something quite small, 100 kilobits per second, right up to some really whizzy speeds of, a gigabit and beyond. And what you can actually see is that most of the so-called legacy technology can do the heavy lifting in most of the quadrants there, 2G, 3G, 4G. Maybe when you're getting down to the 1 millisecond delay that you need, for things like remote surgery, tactile internet, and so on. Some of these, what I call Star Trek use cases, you absolutely need 5G then for that absolutely minimal latency and high bandwidth. But yeah, an example would be in the UK, we've got a smart metering contract with gas and electricity providers. By and large, that's done, and as a technologist, you know, I mean, I wish it was on 4G or 5G, but by and large, it's carried on the GSM network, 2G network, because the modems are cheap, they work, and today, you know, that coverage is ubiquitous. So, you know, that's 20 million homes that will be connected by 2020 on these smart meters will be by and large over the GSM network. So it's worth bearing that in mind as we see these new tech come on the horizon. But 5G for us is more of an evolution rather than a revolution. It is painted as a revolution, certainly in the States, but we see 3 streams evolving over the next couple of years in our network. So we're going to evolve our core network, which is the slice in the middle, to become a 5G ready and almost become like an IT server farm, very similar to the IT industry, the Googles and the Facebooks that you see today. We'll be re-architecting our network along those lines. And then on the 4G really evolves into 5G from a speed and technology point of view. 5G, of course, comes along around 2020 with new radio technology, which means, of course, a new device. The devices don't exist today. I would have brought a 5G device today, but it's about the size of this podium on 4 wheels and not very impressive. But again, it will come. The development times are accelerating as we speak.
Excuse me. Would you say, based on this, on the previous slide and the one before, that there's not a sustainable business case for IoT based on 5G?
I think there is a sustainable case for 5G IoT, but at the moment, being really honest with you, I don't think anyone's actually nailed down what it is. So I absolutely think that there's some use cases out there that will require really high bandwidth and mobility and very small amounts of latency. But right now, today, I couldn't come to you and say it's this business case. So the possibility is there, but at the moment, I think the business cases are fragile. Now, of course, I would say that, I guess, from an operator perspective, you know, it's a very capitally intensive industry, okay? So you will find actually a lot of operators are relatively cautious on 5G, and yet at the same time, you know, genuinely excited about the things that it's going to offer. I think one thing we would say, of course, though, is that regulation is critical. You know, we're in a regulated industry. Certainly, we have Ofcom in the UK. So it very recently published its strategy for identifying spectrum bands, and there'll be an auction hopefully later this year on spectrum. The government have also produced their 5G strategy, and indeed, most unusually for government, they've put a very large amount of money on the table. Really, they want to drive the agenda there to be a 5G leader. So there's money on the table in terms of trials, in terms of rollout of fibre, which is really, really critical, because the base stations that I love, that we put around the country, they have to connect back to something, and they use optical fibre for that. So whichever country, whichever market you're in, you need fibre. You need lots of it, you need it cheaply, you need it everywhere. And so these are the types of things that are happening from a regulatory perspective. In the UK as well, we have actually quite high levels of planning process constraints. I built a kitchen extension on my house last year. It took me 3 months to get planning permission from my friends at the local council. That was good. But in central London, it can take 2 to 3 years to get a new cell site permission on a rooftop. Now, given that data growth is growing at 100% compound annual growth rate, you wait 3 years and you're dead. So, you know, there is, you know, it's with good reason. If you go out to places like South Korea and to Japan and other places where they have you know, a less heavy planning regime, let's put it like that, you can get out the access points, the base stations, a lot quicker. But a digital city is not necessarily a beautiful city as you put out more antennas. And then for us, really, I think the take is it's all about collaboration. We do some trials in the UK with O2, although we're a very consumer-led brand. It's all about the brand. It's all about the proposition to consumers and businesses. So we leverage very heavily the fact that we're part of the Telefonica group. And they've got the 5 Tonic labs in Spain, where they're collaborating with a lot of big vendors on 5G. But we've also got quite a deep relationship with the University of Surrey in Guildford, the 5G Innovation Centre, and we do a lot of work there in the UK on that. And then we participate in time to time for in terms of local trials. So we're working as well with Greenwich Council on some driverless pods at the moment, automatic vehicles in London. Again, that's using our cellular technology. So I think my closing remarks, as I'm fast approaching 5 o'clock, and this is a bit of a texty slide, but for us on the operator side, 5G is more than just another G. It's more than just your 3G, 4G, 5G. It is big, it's profound. We don't see it being rolled out in the same way as 3G and 4G in terms of that operator arms race for speed. The average user actually uses about 2 megabits per second on a handheld device. One of the biggest applications that needs a lot of speed on a mobile device is speedtest.net to test your download. Okay. That said, human nature is that you're in search of that faster and faster speed. What I want to say, of course, though, is 5G is coming. There is absolutely no doubt about that. The whole R&D community, standards community, the brains of the planet now are figuring out all of the standards and the pre-standards. It's currently at the peak on the hype curve. I think it will take longer to arrive in volume than most people think, even though 2020 is cited. I'm sure in London and Glasgow, some of the key cities, European directive, we'll have some 5G presence in 2020 in the capitals, but 4G will do a lot of the heavy lifting for years to come, because we've analysed pretty much most of the use cases, and a lot of them can cope with that, with the building blocks they've got. From an operator perspective, regulatory evolution, choosing my words carefully, is needed to manage this invisible infrastructure. So we want to see better planning permission so that we can put cell sites out there, big and small, and that we can have access to dark fibre as other markets do. And then I think for us, really, 5G is all about industry rather than consumer. So it's about what it can give to big trading companies, to the oil industry, to agriculture. That's where we're seeing the potential benefit and the potential GDP uplift with the deployment of 5G. So for us, it's about being cautious, not over-promising and under-delivering, but at the same time being very proactive in 5G to ensure that we get the very best outcomes for our customers and stakeholders. And that was the end of my presentation. Thank you.